every YouTube buddy! Well, we're back in the Hebrides to complete my Dear Esther walkthrough, finally after 1 year and 6 months. This is the 6th and last video in the series, so if you haven't watched the first 5, I would suggest you use the link in the description to start from the beginning and watch them all the way up to this point. Oh, and a really quick note about Dear Esther. It's hard to classify whatever this is. Some people think it's a game. Some critics consider it only game art because you're just walking through a story. You're able to move about the island in a fairly linear path, but it's more story-driven than anything else. And the story is up for interpretation. There's at least a dozen different ways to interpret the Dear Esther story, and I'll give you hints about how I interpret the story, but you'll have to draw your own conclusions, and you can let me know what your final interpretation is.
If only Donnelly had experienced this, he would have realized he was his own shoreline, as am I. Just as I am becoming this island, so he became his syphilis, retreating into the burning synapses, the stones, the infection.
So this Donnelly is one character that keeps being mentioned in this narrative, and there are 3 or 4 others too. There's Esther, who's supposedly the wife or daughter of the narrator, or the protagonist, which is me. The protagonist doesn't even have a name, so I'm walking through this island with no name. There's also Paul, and there's also a Jakobson, and these characters are all up for interpretation too, because we never see any of them, except in certain cases we'll see their ghosts, and you might see a ghost right up here.
There are headlights reflected in these retinas, too long in the tunnels of my island without a bottom. The sea creatures have risen to the surface, but the gulls are not here to carry them back to their nests. I've become fixed, open and staring, an eye turned on itself. I've become an infected leg whose tracking lines form a perfect map of the junctions of the M5. I will take the exit at mid-thigh and plummet to my Esther.
Okay, so that was kind of a disturbing passage, but what happened is that Esther was involved in a car accident. Paul was the driver of the opposing vehicle that struck the car that Esther was riding in, and she was either driving or riding in the car. And I'm going to assume that I was in the car with her. Esther did not survive, and the reason you're seeing these chemical formulas right there is that alcohol was supposed to have played a part in the traffic accident, but as we are learning through all the clues that we've picked up through the island is that there's another possible cause of the crash, which is a failure of the anti-lock braking system on Paul's vehicle. Paul, I don't think Paul survived either. Let me try to read to you the passage from the Bible that's scrawled on this cliff face, and he used white phosphor or chalk to do that. It's and it came to pass that as I made my journey, and was come nigh unto Damascus about noon. Okay, so committing suicide is frowned upon. Let's not do that again. I'm going to try to finish reading that. So, and was come high unto Damascus about noon. Suddenly there shone from heaven a great light round about me. And then the passage continues. I'll just add it in a comment or something. There's a lot of these passages, and
I have dredged these waters for the bones of the hermit, for the traces of Donnelly, for any sign of Jakobson's flock, for the empty bottle that would incriminate him. I have scoured this stretch of motorway 21 times, attempting to recreate his trajectory, the point when his heart stopped dead and all he saw was the moon over the Sanford Junction. He was not drunk, Esther. He was not drunk at all, and it was not his fault. It was the converging lines that doomed him. This is not a recorded natural condition. The gulls do not fly so low over the motorway and cause him to swerve. The paint scored away from his car in lines like an infection, making directly for the heart.
So the narrator, who's me, has inconsolable grief. I mean, he's just stricken with this unvanquishable grief, and he's trying to replay the accident and determine the real cause, of which he was able to figure out 3 or 4 possible causes of the accident. And there's just no way to console him. So I think what's happening is that he has finally reached this aerial antenna, and he's going to commit suicide.
I am the Ariel. In my passing, I will send news to each and every star.
And that's what's happening. I'm about to commit suicide now.
Dear Esther, I have burnt my belongings, my books, this death certificate. Mine will be written all across this island. Who was Jakobsen? Who remembers him? Donnelly has written of him, but who was Donnelly? Who remembers him? I have painted, carved, hewn, scored into this space all that I could draw from him. There will be another to these shores to remember me. I will rise from the ocean like an island without bottom, come together like a stone, become an aerial, a beacon, that they will not forget you. We've always been drawn here. One day the gulls will return and nest in our bones and our history. I will look to my left and see Esther Donnelly flying beside me. I will look to my right and see Paul Jakobsen flying beside me. They will leave white lines carved into the air to reach the mainland, where help will be sent.
And that last passage suggests that I'm in despair, and the only way out is to jump off of this aerial tower and join Esther and Paul. But look at this. Watch my trajectory. I'm not falling. I'm soaring. So I was a ghost all along. I was retracing my steps through this Hebridean island that represented my purgatory. It was my own personal purgatory to make amends with the death of Esther, my wife. And now that I've made peace with the accident, I'm able to leave the island finally. And that little vocalization right there, that kind of confirms to me that this island has no place or time. It's just like a timeless purgatory. And also in the last narration, you might have noticed that the 4 characters that were in this story besides me, they became only 2 characters. He referred to Esther as Esther Donnelly, so it turned out that she was one and the same. And Esther and Paul were in my life, but then Donnelly and Jakobsen were residents of this abandoned island. And I think that through studying their life and death on this island, I was able to finally come to terms with Esther's death and understand it. So that's my interpretation of the Dear Esther story. There's so much more to discover in this story that I never even mentioned, so we can do that in comments, but I'd also like to hear your personal interpretation of the story, which will be different from mine, so add it in a comment, and also click the like button if you liked this series, and we'll do another one very soon. Thanks for watching.
Come back.